Alright, here we go. We're going to graph a couple of sinusoidal equations and identify a few attributes of them. And the first one we're going to look at is y equals 3 times the sine of 1/4 times x minus pi over 4 minus 3.
May your attention, please. There's a middle school faculty meeting in Mr. Hilbert's room at this time. A middle school meeting in Mr. Hilbert's room at this time. Thank you.
Okay, so in case you're wondering, there is a middle school meeting in Mr. Hilbert's room at this time. But back to our graph. The first thing we want to find would be the period. Right, and I always represent that with a T. I think your book uses a P. And that's always 2 pi divided by this constant right here. Okay. So in our case, we're going to have 2 pi divided by 1/4, and that's going to be 8 pi. Now, the next thing we might want to find would be the phase shift. In other words, how far it slid left or right. And that equals this constant inside the parentheses divided by this one outside. So in this case, it's going to be pi over 4 divided by 1/4, and that gives us a phase shift of pi. So our period is 8 pi, and our phase shift is a positive pi. Now, if someone were to ask you what the maximum value would be, we would look at this horizontal shift, or the vertical shift. Minus 3. Add the amplitude. Minus 3 plus 3 is 0. To find the minimum value, take the vertical shift and subtract the amplitude. Negative 3 minus 3 is negative 6. Now, sometimes it's helpful to know what the midline is. And that's just this vertical shift here. The midline is negative 3. Now, what we can do is we can take all that information and we can now sketch a graph. So let's do that. Okay. We know that the period is 8 pi. We know that the phase shift is pi. We know that the midline equals negative 3. The maximum is 0, and the minimum is negative 6. Okay. So there we go. We've got all that information. And now what we've got to do is just go ahead and put it on a graph. And let's do that. So, what I'm going to do here, there's my y-axis, and this is where I'm going to put 0. Okay, here's pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi, 5 pi, 6 pi, 7 pi, 8 pi, 9 pi. Okay, right. I know that I'm going to start at pi and I'm going to end at 9 pi because the period is 8 pi. Now, I like to come in and mark the midline, and I know that I'm going to start here and I'm going to end there. And I know that halfway through, because it's a sine function, I'm going to be crossing the midline again. Now, because it's a positive sine function, I know that 1/4 of the way through that I'm going to be reaching my maximum value. And I know that 3/4 of the way through I'm going to reach my minimum value. So now what I do is I just connect the points with a smooth curve. And there is my translated sine graph. Okay? Well, that's one. Let's take a look at another one. In this one, what we'll do is we'll look at y equals 1/2 times the sine of pi over 2 times x plus pi over 2 plus 2. Okay. Again, now to find the period, we take 2 pi, because that's the period of a standard sine function, and we divide it by this constant right here. So we take 2 pi, we divide it by pi over 2, and the period becomes 4. Now the phase shift is the constant inside the parentheses, pi over 2, over pi over 2, but this time it's actually a negative pi over 2 because our sign in here is a plus. This becomes negative 1. The midline is 2, right? That's just the constant over here. The minimum value, we take and subtract the amplitude from the midline, and it becomes 1 1/2. The maximum value is the midline plus the amplitude, which becomes 2 1/2. Now, to go ahead and sketch the graph of this one, what we can do is, this one's going to be a little on the compressed side, I think. The period is 4. But we're shifted back negative 1, and we count over 1, 2, 3, 4. So I know that I'm going to start here, I'm going to end there, and because it's a sine function, I know midway through I'm going to be at my midpoint. But now what we've got to look at again is that we're shifted up 2 units. So I'm going to call this up here too. Here's my midline. Right? So I'm going to start here. Halfway through I'm going to be at the middle. And I'm going to end up on the midline. Now, a quarter of the way through, I know I'm going to be at my maximum, which is 2 1/2. And 3/4 of the way through, I know I'm going to be at my minimum, which is 1 1/2. So this graph is going to look, well, let's move my 2 1/2 down a little bit, kind of like this. Right. Kind of short. Okay. All right. Well, I hope this helps. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a lovely evening, and I will see you tomorrow.